Hey guys, it's Carter Shaw. I'm here with another guest. I had Donnie maybe a couple months ago, and now I have Vince Dao, leader of the APU, American Populist Union, and is a populist conservative Christian, and is here to be interviewed.
It's so true. What's up?
If you'd like to introduce how you got into politics and introduce yourself.
Hold on. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, so I'm Vince Dao. I'm a conservative YouTuber. Honestly, most of Carter's viewers probably like have heard of me or seen me around. But yeah, I got into politics when I was about 15 years old, mainly because I kind of like took, I guess you could say, my first like preliminary red pill, and kind of being in California and going to high school in California, I really felt like I needed a place to sort of like vent and really like get my thoughts out there. And I guess I kind of found that I wasn't going to be like that kid at school that just got into arguments with everyone. I was like, it could be more effective. We could probably reach more people if we did this online. So that's kind of how it started. And then, I guess along the way, we kind of went down the generic pipeline of like a generic conservative to like more of a libertarian, and then finally we kind of move into like the populist paleo conservative sphere of things, which I honestly think is the character arc of most conservative zoomers. But that's where we are here now, running the APU, doing this content, being part of this community, I guess.
So true, so true. I did find out a bit ago that you were doxxed at one point for your high school, and they tried to cancel your valedictorianship.
Yep.
Do you speak to that? Speak to what happened there?
Yeah. So amidst Black Lives Matter, which was like June 2020, like that's June 2020, when it was really starting to like kick off. And you might remember what the attitude was towards conservatives at that time. It was extremely hostile. Like I was definitely not the only one that this was happening to. Like you used to see pages during this time that would be, I don't know, so-and-so high school, let's just say 13th Street High School, whatever. And literally there would be these accounts called like 13th Street High School Trump supporters. And it literally just be like doxing like people who supported Trump that went to school. So that was kind of the culture it arose out of. And yeah, I was out here. I really didn't care. I was like out here really saying which would, I guess, be considered at the time, even for like a conservative, somewhat edgy. I guess I did a little bit of trolling kind of statements about BLM, and I was really just hard on it. I was just like, rioting. These people are terrorists, and they're basically burning down our country. Saying like strong things like this, and the kids at my school didn't like that. They kind of, this hate mob sort of came after me on Twitter, social media, stuff like that. I'm actually, look, in retrospect, it's probably kind of a nice thing that school was online back then. But yeah, that all sort of took off, and then eventually one kid at school doxed me, and this other group of kids. Andrew was his name, actually. He led the charge against me, and they actually started an email campaign to my principal, basically trying to get my valedictorian speech for the next school year shut down, because I was number one class rank at the time, and still ultimately was. Total victory. It did not get shut down, by the way. The principal was like, no, that's not how it works. You can't shut down we can't like invalidate your number one ranking because you're conservative or whatever it is. So it was a total victory. But that's what happened to me. I'm sure it happened to a lot of conservative kids. I think, at least for me, I was someone with like a platform and who had put themselves out there. But I would see a lot of times these other kids, it's like they weren't even that open about their support for Trump, or maybe they post like one thing or whatever on Instagram or whatever. And these kids were just getting like crucified. They were just getting like just at their school. It was just insane. And so that was the culture going on. I guess that was one example of it. But I remember during that summer, I would get a lot of messages from like followers and stuff having the same or even worse things happen to them. And I remember we used to kind of all stick up for each other. It was a interesting time.
Mm-hmm. I remember I made a music video, and I got doxxed for it at one point. They leaked my school after they found my mother's Instagram. I don't know how that happened, but my mother works at the school, and then they contacted the school, and then the school contacted my mother. So then my mother contacted me and was like, hey, they contacted me, and I'm going to have you chill out on the politics so I don't get fired. And then I was like, no. And then
no.
that was that.
Wojak.
But you definitely had like a lot of people trying to stop you whenever you did something. Mm-hmm. But I see so many other conservatives whenever they had faced adversities and people trying to stop them, whether it comes to something like, Owen Shroyer or what's happening with other people with January 6th, they're just completely quiet about it because they are too scared to get criticized by the left or whatever. They're just completely coping. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's a real litmus test for like all conservatives is like, are you willing to stand up? Yeah, when quite frankly, back in like 2019, 2020, when you would post a MAGA hat and maybe get some mean comments, like that was easy. That was actually the easy period. Now is really the hard times when it's not even so much that we're getting like criticized, but we're out here getting fired from jobs, no-fly listed, persecuted directly by the government, deplatformed, like things like this. I think it's a real litmus test for conservatives, whether or not, for me, it's really a big thing for me, like whether or not you're willing to actually stick up for people, like when this type of stuff is happening, like when it's scary, when it's hard, when it's like someone like, I don't know, Nick Fuentes, where it's like, oh, but I can't say it, he's too controversial, stuff like that, even though it's very clear and we all secretly know, like, okay, this is someone who, like, they're going to do the same thing to us. They're all coming for all of us. And they're like, if we don't stick up here, then, we're not going to be able to stick up there. Even someone like Owen Shroyer, I guess you could say, is like a little bit more on the fringe. I mean, I wouldn't see him like that, but like, I guess in general circles. And so I think it frankly comes down to this. If you're not willing to like stick up for these people, you're not willing to stick up people like in our circles who are getting persecuted by the government, deplatformed, all this stuff because you're too scared of the controversy or whatever, you're weak, you're useless. And like, I don't really see you. I mean, yeah, okay, you might vote for us, you might caucus with us, but I don't really see you as someone who should be leading this movement if you're not, if you are one of these people who is frankly scared of the heat when it comes to stuff like that.
It's so true. It's so true. I mean, they're all so quiet, and it's funny because they're always like, oh, the revolutionists, they stood up to this tyrannical government and these people that hated them, and they basically idolize them, and yet they refuse to ever complete the LARP. They just put them at their home screen, and that's it. That's their dopamine hit. They never actually go out to do anything. And I think maybe it's somewhat fueled by the Second Amendment because they're like, oh, if we let the country go to tyranny, then we can just overthrow them. And that just means we'll just cave on every social issue. And that's exactly what's pretty much been happening.
Yeah. No, it's definitely true.
I wanted to know what your general thoughts were on Trump's speech last night.
I thought the first half was like pretty good. It was decent. It was entertaining. To be honest, the second half, it was a little bit I don't know, it felt a little bit generic, felt a little bit repetitive. So it was, I mean, definitely I wouldn't say it's like the worst speech I've ever seen from him, but I think like many of the Trump rallies post inauguration, it definitely left a lot to be desired. Here's the big thing for me, really, and this is what I've been saying. It's like when you look at the issues that are the biggest problems that Trump's base right now is facing are two things. Number one, it's the medical apartheid state, which we all know about. And number two, like I mentioned earlier, it's the persecution by the regime, both by public and private entities. Okay, and these are things that are basically unanimously important to all of us as Trump supporters, especially the medical apartheid state part of that. I mean, that's something that, like, no matter which end of the Trump base you're on, the more normie side, the more dissident side, like, it's something we all basically agree on. And what are you getting from Trump on either of these things? Oh, an occasional throwaway statement. I mean, I know people say he said something about, oh, I believe in your freedom last night, during the rally, is like a throwaway comment about what's going on. And it's like, really, that's like pleasing to you. That's enough. You have many major cities in the United States. You can't even like eat at a restaurant or like go to the gym without having to show proof of, that thing, that thing. Right. And it's like, we need more from Trump on this. It is an issue that is so important to so many of his supporters, basically all of his supporters, and you're not getting focus from him. Okay, what instead you're getting is like these 2019 talking points about the radical left Democrats and all this stuff. And quite frankly, I mean, I still like Trump, I still support Trump, but for me, I can't see this as anything less than what is essentially a betrayal. It's an abandonment, right, of his own supporters, because here are these issues that are like really coming down on his supporters, the people who tirelessly campaigned for him, voted for him, donated for him. Many of these people got, fired, physically assaulted, like trying to stick up for this guy. And then what happens when, his supporters are the ones that are basically in the firing lines of these problems? Nope, not going to talk about that. Not going to talk about this medical apartheid state. Not going to talk really more than a footnote about, the persecution of my supporters. Instead, it's all about the radical left Democrats and the Green New Deal and stuff like this. And it's really disappointing, to be honest, to watch. But yeah, with that being said, I'm not an anti-Trump, or I'm not a guy who's abandoning Trump. But like, for me, that's really the sentiment that I've most been feeling about the guy lately, is just a lot of disappointment. Not necessarily bad, but frankly, a lot of disappointment.
I definitely did notice that, like, once Trump went off prompter, he started talking about, like, things. He started returning to more his 2016 form when he went off prompter. He'd start talking about, like, ancestors and culture, but then you go immediately back to the prompter and would start talking about, like, Afghanistan, and Joe Biden did blank in Afghanistan, and we need to stay and do blank. But it was kind of just a bit of establishment talking points, because the people like his speech writers, his inner circle, which is like who's giving him the prompter, is who's co-opting the message. His instincts are still the same. When he's off the prompter, he's still 2016 Trump.
It's true.
But he's just so influenced by this inner circle.
And see, I think that's part of the problem, is that, if we wanted establishment Republican talking points, there are plenty of people to listen to for that. The reason why Trump, and let me tell you, this is the big reason why. I know a lot of people say, well, the Trump rallies just don't feel as energetic anymore. It doesn't feel like it's there. I'll tell you that the reason is not just because, like, I don't know, he's older, his voice is less like projecting or whatever. It's also because of the messaging itself. The reason why Trump rallies and the Trump movement felt so energetic back then is because he was genuinely saying things that other Republicans wouldn't say in the ways that Trump would say it. And that's why it felt so entertaining. That's why it felt so, like, energizing and like just spiritual almost, to like be a part of that movement. Whereas now you look at him again, it's the Lindsey Graham could go up there and give like 90% of the speech minus like a few like nice things here and there. Lindsey Graham could go up and give that speech, and you wouldn't really notice the difference, right? You wouldn't even think anything of it. And it's like, that is why we like Trump so much. He was different. He was basically challenging the paradigm. He didn't sound like establishment Republican. And what you're hearing from him now, when he's on teleprompter, you notice when he's off teleprompter, it's a great point you made. He gets it, right? He's hitting the right points. But on teleprompter, he sounds exactly like an establishment Republican. It's like, at that point, what is like the functional point of Trump? The point of Trump is to be the anti-establishment Republican, and that's like, I guess that's like also the trade-off of Trump is like, he's not a politician, so he won't necessarily be as like politically effective, but he's out here fighting for the right things because he's anti-establishment. If he's going to just become the establishment, like, what is the functional point of that guy? So, and again, that's not me abandoning Trump, but that's kind of the concern I'm raising here, and why I'm trying to like push the needle on him. And I think there's a lot of irrationality on all sides, really, of the Trump base. It's like, anytime you question him, counter signal him, and anytime all I'm trying to do is hold the guy accountable for what everyone knows and everyone agrees he should be doing, and hold the guy basically to the agenda that he got elected on in the first place. And people misinterpret that as being like anti-Trump or Trump hater. I'm not one of those things. I'm not Fog City Midge on this issue. I'm just saying these are valid criticisms, and it does not hurt to criticize Trump in order to push him into the right direction. Like, what is the drawback of that? It's not election season. He's not running for office, if he does run again, till like 2024. Right now, we need to be like pushing the guy in the right direction. What I'm doing is good for the Overton window. What we're trying to say is a positive thing, but people just don't get it like that. And they're like, oh yeah, you're anti-Trump, whatever. It's just not the case. It's not true.
That's definitely all so true. I mean, he's getting these like establishment, libertarian neocon talking points, and it's like, I won't do anything about people mandating vaccines or mandated masks, but I believe in freedom. Just these little quotes that really mean absolutely nothing. They're just filler Lindsey Graham type of talking points, just there to like keep us in line and be like, yeah, he's still that guy, but he's not being that guy right now. He's allowing the inner circle to influence him, because like the inner circle has started to like accept him, when like previously in 2016 they hated Trump, the establishment hated Trump, but now that they're acting like they're liking Trump doesn't have that like idea that he has to go opposite of that, because he's he doesn't have that dissent. So that's where we need to pick up the ball, and we need to start dissenting strategically and pushing back in ways of like what he's doing right now is bad, and we need to return to the old Trump. We need to be pushing harder than ever right now. And that's kind of what I've observed on it.
Yeah. And I think that's why, I think the base needs to become more vocal about this. It was actually good when, Trump got booed last night at the rally for, that comment, because, and honestly, that's what we need more of, because, we all know the establishment GOP is not going to, they're going to push the guy in one direction. We need to be there as the base to push him in the other direction. And I think that's part of the problem, is that, the base just really has not been vocal enough, and we all sort of complain about it. We're like, oh, we don't like this. We don't like he's acting. But because of like this loyalty to him, because of this feeling that, and it is a true feeling that he's like this symbol, against the establishment, and this symbol to make America great again. That's what we want. I feel like we are too scared to really criticize the guy and really point out, what the guy's doing wrong. And as a result of that, it's like nobody's holding Trump accountable. The establishment loves it because he's basically doing everything they want, essentially, and the base is not out here saying what's wrong with you. I think at the end of the day, Trump is responsive to the base, but the problem is the base isn't being really that vocal about it. We're still in the phase where it's like, if you even remotely criticize Trump or say he's not doing enough or he's not being strong enough, it's just like everyone's after you, right? Everyone's all like, oh, but you're anti-Trump, you're a never Trumper. Like, no, that's not the case. We are the ones actually, and I think this is the big problem that we saw under the Trump presidency, is that people became too loyal, I think, to Trump the person, and not loyal enough to Trump the idea or Trump the symbol, right? And I think this was the big reason why up until like 2020, Hannity, who was not loyal to Trump the idea, who's fundamentally and principally disloyal to Trump the idea, but very loyal to Trump the person. So he defends like Trump the person like constantly, whereas you had someone like Tucker Carlson, who was very loyal to Trump the idea. He was very loyal to the principles that Trump ran off of 2016. And because of that, he would hold Trump accountable. He would point out when Trump like wasn't doing the right thing. He wasn't staying loyal to what he was elected on. And as a result, you had this common consensus for many years, all the way up until like 2020, when Tucker really started to become popular. You had this common consensus in the conservative base that was like, well, Tucker's too anti-Trump for me. I heard boomers say this all the time. Tucker's like anti-Trump. I don't like it, but I love Hannity. I love Hannity like that. And this sort of attitude that you see, I think, still pervades, is kind of the reason why, even as Trump moves away from the agenda, he got elected on, his original message, people still go along with it. People won't say anything about it because we have fallen too much in love with Trump the person and not Trump the symbol and actually the ideas that Trump ran on. And I think that's really what I'm more loyal to, right? And don't get me wrong, I'm not anti-Trump the person. I think he's a good person. I think he's trying to do the right thing. But my main loyalty is to that original agenda, and perhaps even beyond that. But that's really what I will fight for. That's what I expect to see. It's not just that I want Trump to be elected in 2024 again to own the libs. No, I want Trump to be elected to stand up to the political establishment, defend the American nation state, right? Things like this. So.
And it's absolutely so true that like we need to stand up to these people in the conservative circle and in the conservative establishment. These people that have just been for years moving conservatism towards a dying message that has just continued to move the ball to the left. I mean, these libertarians, they're always like, they hate the feds, they hate power, but the truth of it is that they only hate power as a means of keeping us out. They don't hate like the police force whenever they're like arresting us. They don't hate the legal system whenever they're just doing their BS that they have been doing. They don't do anything about the feds really like doing anything with like mask mandates. They're simply put just like, we'll let private companies do anything, and we won't let conservatives get in power. We won't let them utilize power because that would be fascism. But we're going to continually not push back against any of the liberal usages of power. And it's simply become evident that they are just pawns of the establishment. They're pawns of DC. They're never going to call out the actual swamps in DC. They're never going to call them out because they're a part of it. And that's really the truth of it.
Oh yeah. I think libertarianism, or as we would better understand what you're kind of referring to is probably more like fusionism, right? Conservatarianism, the kind of Reaganite Tea Party kind of wave of ideology, all descends essentially from Goldwater and Buckley from back in the day, right? You know, I don't think the establishment, which just to be clear, when we talk about the establishment, we're talking about an entity that is morally corrupt, right? It's not just because they're the establishment, but because the establishment that runs our country is morally corrupt and anti-American, right? So I don't think that fusionist doctrine, fusionist conservatism is a threat to the system at all. And I don't think the system views that thing to be a threat, right? They don't care. That's why they're perfectly willing to tolerate it, right? Because you're right. Ultimately, what fusionist conservatism, conservatarianism exists to be is simply controlled opposition, right? You have this dogmatic doctrine all about, you know, not using the government ever to achieve our ends, which essentially hands over, because politics is the art of wielding power. So if either you wield power or the other side wields power, or both of you wield power at the same time, but there really is no chance, like, way to opt out and then not expect the other side to still wield power anyway. That's not how politics works, right? But that's what we are doing. That's what we exist as to be as conservatives, you know, in the system, essentially as, like you said, controlled opposition. And so the system absolutely does not fear, you know, these people. And that's why the system really has not tried that hard to really stop those people. The system really fears people like us, people who are out here saying, you know, we want to use power, actually, want to wield power. The institutions are the problem, you know, public and private. There really is no distinction. And, you know, Americans are being persecuted by the regime. And, you know, the political establishment is corrupt, and we ought to use political force. And political force, let me put, you know, emphasis on the political side of it, but political force to stand up for our principles and actually enact our principles and see our principles fulfilled in our country. Then you notice, then it really becomes a threat to the system, right? Then Donald Trump really in 2016 and beyond becomes a threat to the system, right? Then our political movement are the people who, you know, actually get targeted by the regime and actually kind of have people after us. That's the reason why. And I think that's a sign, really, that what we're doing is working. What at least what we're standing for is effective, or has the potential to be effective, and that's why it's viewed as such a threat.
It's so true. Everything you said is completely true and has been completely vindicated by time and by anecdotal evidence of the history of this country. It's so true that the establishment has been shifting us away from winning as a means to keeping us out of power and keeping us away from a winning message. And they've just been bought off and paid for. They're corrupt completely. But what I'd like to move to is, you did mention earlier how you've been doxxed, but you kept going. You were resilient. What are your thoughts on us becoming more inclined to be peacefully protesting stuff, or like peacefully protesting stuff whenever it's like mask mandates or something?
Well, what do you mean by that exactly?
Like, instead of being like complacent, like whenever there's like colleges being like demanding vaccines or whatever, like we start actually doing something about it. Like we start peacefully protesting. It's called, we do a little getting suspended at school. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that numbers are important, and like optics are important. But by optics, I mean, like, you know, like, I guess the way you kind of project yourself and you project your image to the group. But I would agree. I think, you know, some form of somewhat civil disobedience with a lot of this stuff is kind of necessary, because, you know, the reality of life and the reality of politics and reality of the world, as you see it, as you saw with Black Lives Matter, which was like basically a minority majority movement, more or less, right, is that it's not necessarily always the people who have the most numbers on their side or whatever that kind of are able to implement change, or at least kind of get one side of the aisle to essentially back down. It's the people who oftentimes actually make up a pretty small minority of like the general population, but are the most vocal about it, right? It's a true statement that the squeakiest wheel gets the oil, right? It's like, if all basically we need to be kind of effective politically speaking is just a small group of very focused, very vocal, very strategic, right, very kind of out there people, and I think you can start to see really the Overton window start to shift on those things, you know. And if you want to talk about the issue of masks, you know, I just moved from California to Florida. So in California, Like you go to stores, everyone wears masks. Like it's like 99% essentially compliance rate. And so to see someone essentially not doing it, it's almost a social shock. Like you're shocked to see it. Out here in Florida, you know, depending on the day, depending how many college students are out, you know, the mask compliance rate is anywhere from like 30 to 70%. But still, regardless, there's a pretty sizable number of people who you kind of see not doing it. And then just socially speaking, it's not like socially unacceptable, and I haven't done it a single time. Actually, I haven't walked into a store with a mask a single time out here, but it's not even seen as like socially unacceptable for me to walk around maskless, right? I think that's important. It's like if you just kind of see people out here doing this stuff, you know, the needle moves. So. And
Sorry,
the masses follow the masses follow like, you know, a very small group of people. So
it's so true. I got a bit distracted by chat, but it's everything you said is so true. It's so true. I saw you made a video about Afghanistan, which I found a very, very good video. A lot of people aren't talking about like the idea of like why the Afghanistan people tend to just accept the Taliban and don't actually like fight against this, because they honestly favor them more than us. Whenever you look at like how we try to nation build something not compatible with their culture, and we try to push this like feminism and gay stuff on them, and they're like, I don't want to do that. So they're kind of just being complacent in the rule of the Taliban, and that's just what's happened.
Yeah, I mean, I would go so far as to say I think a lot of Afghanistan is honestly welcoming the Taliban as liberators, which is a crazy statement, I know. And I know, you know, there's anytime there's a regime change, there's going to be people who don't like the regime change. And so obviously there are people trying to flee, right? There are people trying to get out. You see these people at the airport and stuff like this. But I think overall, I think most of the population of Afghanistan is either favorable or at the very least indifferent towards the Taliban, you know. And like I mentioned in that video, I think most of Afghanistan really sees us as foreign invaders, you know. And you're talking about a culture that even if you want to describe Western civilization at its best, you know, traditionally, or at its worst, which it probably is right now, either way, either Western civilization you're talking about, good Western civilization or bad Western civilization, still is totally incompatible with a civilization like Afghanistan. So you go here, you bring, you know, liberal democracy, freedom, feminism, whatever, you know, all that stuff. It just doesn't work, right? And that's the reality I think people fail to recognize, is that, you know, democracy, quote unquote, I mean, it's a crappy system to begin with, but it's definitely not a universal system. It definitely applies better in certain societies than other societies. You look at a country like Afghanistan, again, which has never had a democratic government ever, and has frankly been ruled by like warlords for most of its history. I mean, what do you expect? What do you expect the people to want to be inclined to? You know, the reality of the situation is people really don't like change. You know, they don't like change. I mean, people like essentially to be governed by the same sort of system they've historically been governed by. And you go here, you implement this alien system of government, this alien world essentially to them. And you've only done it for about like 20 or so years, and then you leave. What do you expect to happen, right? What do you expect to happen? And you look at the Taliban. Quite frankly, I think a lot of the population of Afghanistan probably sees many of the things that we tried to push on them as like degenerate and hedonistic, essentially. And so many of them probably see the Taliban, which I'm not in favor of, but they probably is like, I guess, more austere. And you're talking about a population that 99% of the population of Afghanistan wants Sharia law to be the law of the land. I mean, what do you expect them to want? What do you expect them to support? Western liberal, gay, feminist democracy, or the Taliban? What do you expect from them? So it shouldn't be surprising.
It's very true. This like idea that conservatives somehow have this idea now. I guess it's a conservative idea now that you can really just mix cultures that's completely different from the culture that was there before, which is entirely a liberal idea. Just, you know, multiculturalism, bringing this other culture, bringing it here, and then being like, all right, now we're going to adapt their culture and we're going to just allow this culture. But it really doesn't work that way. People don't like feeling like what they know, their way of life, they don't like it being like stripped away from them. They don't like their livelihoods and just the way they live. They don't like it be teared under the rug. And that's really just what's happened in America. And it's also why Afghanistan doesn't like us, and it's honestly us being there in the first place trying to push our values is going to create more terrorism than being in Afghanistan in the first place ever stopped.
No, it's so true. I think there was and on the topic of 9/11, I think itself, there's a great famous quote from Pat Buchanan, which we shared in the APU video the other day, which essentially goes something along the lines of, they were here because we were there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the reality of the situation. You go into a nation like, what do you think really going to stop terrorism? You go into a nation like Afghanistan, not only do you invade it, not only do you basically, set up this alien foreign system of government, which the people don't like and all that stuff, but, you stay there. And then, like, on top of that, like, you not only do you impose like a democracy or whatever, but you use it to impose like values and systems and feminism and all this stuff that is just antithetical to Sharia law, which is what the majority of 99% again of the population of Afghanistan supports. How do you expect them to feel about you? Not only are you occupying their lands, not only are you occupying their country as a foreign invader, but then on top of that, you're using it to basically insult their religion to their face. What do you expect to happen, right? And then obviously, it gets even worse because you pull out, and so there's this like minority population in Afghanistan that actually like the American rule, and then now they're like, oh shoot, we've been abandoned. But then you're like, okay, we're gonna let these people now supposedly into our country. So who is really coming into the country? It's on two ends. Okay, number one, the people. Hold on, is my battery okay? My mic battery might die in a second. I'm gonna have to switch it out. But number one, you have just people who are like radical Islamists who just, hate what we did there. But also number two, you have people who we essentially abandoned, right? Who we like left behind in Afghanistan. And then they too kind of hate us in the sense that they feel like we abandoned them. And it's just a recipe for disaster all around.
It's so true. It's so true. And I'd even go as far to say that it's highly possible that it was never supposed to be successful. I mean, the longer they can get in there, the more they can shift the money from the American middle class to the military-industrial complex and these foreign wars, and shifting that money away from us towards them and their congressional budget. The longer they can stay in there, like even after they had the original goal of killing someone and they killed them, and then they stayed in because it was never planned to just get in and get out. Even though we shouldn't have just got in and got out in the first place, even if we did, that was never actually the plan.
Yeah, of course. The plan is just some delusion about kind of a globalist American empire. It was summed up very well by George H.W. Bush. Following the fall of the Soviet Union, what he says is not, all right, well, this is our chance to allow for self-determination around the world, or this is our chance to really kind of come home and pull out and nation build here at home in America. Instead, what H.W. Bush said after the fall of the Soviet Union is, this is our chance to make the world safe for democracy. This is our chance to create a new world order sort of around the world. And that kind of fundamental declaration, that sort of establishment of like, this is our goal, has really been the rationale for all U.S. foreign policy, essentially, post-Cold War. It's very interesting. You look pre-Cold War. I mean, the way we approach, we were obviously in all these proxy wars pre-Cold War, but if you notice, the way we approached this was more in the sense of defeating an enemy than it was the sense of building up a nation, or at least trying to establish a democracy. You look at the United States, actually, as a matter of fact, was perfectly willing to prop up a lot of dictatorships around the world during the Cold War, just because it was about fighting communism. It was about taking out the Reds. It was about fighting this enemy, not so much telling South Vietnam or South Korea, or, whoever, like, you need to implement a democracy, right? But and that is something that I think America is capable of, because we obviously have a strong military, stuff like that. We are able to fight enemies. What we are not good at is actually being imperialist, right? We are not actually good at building up nations or really imposing our way of life on nations. And I think a big reason for that is, unlike the British Empire, who is obviously, the greatest imperialist in world history, America is not a kind of a nation. It's not really a civilization that with the ethos to actually be imperialist. We've never really been honest imperialists with ourselves. And when you really think about it, it's kind of a contradiction, because America is a nation that's founded off of anti-imperialism, kind of founded off of nationalism. And that's a big reason why historically, the American people have never really been fans of like building a new world order, really like spreading an empire around the world. We're just not built for it. I don't think our governmental system is built for it either. I think we were built to be this nation state, built to be a country. And so as a result of that, we as Americans absolutely suck. We're terrible imperialists because we can't even be honest with ourselves about imperialism. We always try to say we're trying to spread freedom, we're trying to spread democracy, stuff like this, when in reality what we're doing is imperialism. But the problem is, if we can't even be honest with ourselves about that imperialism, it is bound to fail. And I think that's why we are so incompetent when it comes to nation building. We're so incompetent when it comes to occupying these places because we're not imperialists. We were not meant to be imperialists, right?
It's so true. I mean, these are the same people that are always worshiping the founding fathers or whatever. But I guess the founding fathers really would want us to be in Afghanistan, even though the whole point they got in, the whole point they revolted in the first place was literally just to fight back against imperialists. I mean, we're trying to enforce our cringe and gay culture on Afghanistan, but it remains true that when Britain tried to enforce their culture on us, we fought back because when people have their culture ripped up from under them and people try to enforce a new culture on them, they don't like it. And that's what happened when we went in Afghanistan. They didn't like it, and they sided with the Taliban because of Sharia law and their views on that. And these same people are like, multiculturalism, they don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah, no, it's so true. And it's like, I think if you're truly an American exceptionalist, like you truly believe, as these people always say, and like you can't stand this like fake patriotism, but America's so exceptional, America's unique. Well, if you think that is the case, what makes you think you can just import the American system into Afghanistan and magically expect it to work? It's not going to happen. It's not going to work like that because, again, America is unique. America is exceptional. That means that the American people are different. American people are different from the Mexican people or the Afghan people or the Chinese people, wherever it is. And so we have a system that supposedly works. I guess historically has worked. It doesn't really work that well anymore, but I guess historically has worked for, our people. That doesn't mean the system's going to work for a place that has a different religion, different values, different population, different demographics, different everything from the United States,
It truly is a LARP what these people go out and say their platform is and what they say their beliefs is. It's really a LARP. They're like, I'm a federalist. I love the revolutionist. I'm also a libertarian and anti-federalist. It doesn't make sense, but it doesn't have to, because simply I'm just trying to retard the political conservative movement. That's my whole job, and that's what they're doing. And it's exactly what's happened. I mean, George Washington really. He loves invading Afghanistan. He loves invading other countries. He loved it. Like when that one time, he loves free trade too. Like one of his first laws he signed one of the first laws he signed was a tariff. He loves free trade. All right. He loves other countries. He loves other people trying to replace the people native here. He loves other cultures trying to just intertwine. He loves the American salad, the gay American empire. He just loves it.
I know. Yeah, and we knew anything about George Washington, that's what he was really a fan of. That's what he really wanted,
And then I see the same thing of the praising of the military. I also see it with the praising of the police, which doesn't really make sense. I mean, these libertarians usually libertarianism would intertwine this idea of a state police, but they also really I guess the police force in general, which has continued to just screw us over. What are your thoughts on the police as of recent and what they have done, relative to certain areas? Obviously, it's not all police forces. I'm sure my city in Mississippi, I'm sure their police force is mostly fine. But if you go into an area like Chicago, or if you go even in the Republican areas, like in Oakland, Mississippi, I have a video of a man literally being thrown to the ground, worse than I've seen any BLM video, just literally just being thrown to the ground and tripped just because he walked in a store without a mask. It's crazy. I mean, these people are resist. We need to resist. The founding fathers, they resisted, and the LARP's real. I'm a boogaloo boy. I'm getting arrested. Time to praise the police. Back to blue. What are your thoughts on all that?
I think that's one of the the later stage red pills for I think it's what a lot of young conservatives are really on board with now, but a lot of our older folks. But one of the, like, I think the later stage realizations you'll come through in your kind of political evolution as a conservative is like, yeah, it's the realization that the police and the military as institutions, and we're not talking, oh, but this soldier's a patriot, this cop is a patriot, as those institutions exist, are not on your side. The reason, of course, being when you really just kind of think about it logically, okay, so if we all recognize, I think most people do. I mean, I know some people are like, no, it's not. But if we generally recognize that the American regime is against us, the American regime hates us and wants people like us destroyed, persecuted, made irrelevant, stuff like that, I think it only logically extends to the fact that, who are the strong arms, who are the enforcers of the American regime? Well, clearly it is the police and just law enforcement in general. So obviously we're not just singling out the local police, the FBI, DHS, all of our security agencies, intelligence agencies, federal law enforcement as well. These institutions act as bodies of the American regime, right? They serve the will of the American regime. At the end of the day, they're not serving you at the end of the day. They enforce the laws. And so if the people writing the laws and the apparatus that puts those laws into place is not on your side, then by function, the law enforcement is not going to be either. Nor really, I think, would be the military as an institution. These things exist to serve the state. They exist to serve the regime. They exist to preserve the government, which is not a bad thing. We're not libertarians. We understand that these things are necessary to create a stable society and to, defend society. We're not anarchists or stuff like that. But to the extent to which the people running the regime and the people running the country hate us and want to destroy us and hate the country and want to destroy the country, which they do, it only exists to reason that the institutions which they control and the institutions that they use to enforce their will by proxy, even if a lot of cops are patriots, even if a lot of soldiers are patriots, as they exist as institutions, are not on our side. At the end of the day, you really can't, I think, trust even a lot of the patriots, quote unquote, in these institutions to really do the right thing if push comes to shove.
I mean, it's so true. I mean, the American dream of wanting to go home and like feed your kids, being able to put a roof over your head, it's something that police officers also hold. I mean, if they do, like, if they seriously are patriots, it doesn't matter because they're often giving orders by like these swamp monsters. And if they disobey the orders, they're going to get fired or maybe even prosecuted or killed by an angry mob. And they're simply not going to be able to go feed their kids. They want to do the same thing. So even the patriotic ones, they can't enact on anything except for the state's will. And that's really their job. And we're so like, we've been so, intertwined with this culture of praising military people and praising officers. And to a level we should. I mean, that's a very inherently masculine thing to like sacrifice yourself for something you love. And that's also one of the reasons why the liberals hate us, because it's masculine, and why they actually take away the legitimate role and shift it to this gay stuff. And I mean, who's gonna be the one that arrests Owen Shroyer? Who's gonna be the ones that put us into gulags? I mean, even the patriotic ones will be doing it. It's simply the case.
It's true. And I think, again, I want to emphasize that we don't say this from like a libertarian, like anti-government necessarily position. I mean, the military and police absolutely should exist, and they should have the power to enforce law and enforce order. And I think that's inherently conservative to believe. But the reason we dislike or we believe these institutions are opposed to us is because, they are not being wielded by responsible people. They're not being wielded by conservative people. They're being essentially wielded, to enforce evil and being wielded against good people. And so, when that is the case, and it's not that and this is what like libertarians will hear us say this and get so excited, like, oh, so you want to abolish the police? You want to abolish the military? But when I say libertarians, I mean like real libertarians, like minarchist anarchy. Oh, you want to abolish these institutions? And it's like, no, we don't. We want them to be used responsibly. And I think once you're mature enough in politics, you kind of understand the distinction where it's like, it's not a question of abolish or make as big as possible, but it's more of a question of is this institution necessary? Which the answer is actually yes. And then who is going to wield the power of this institution?
I do have the video of Owen Shroyer that I wanted to show right now, which I'm going to get at. A lot of people haven't seen this video. They don't know the video I'm about to play, which is from about a year ago, where he was arrested at the Capitol for simply standing with his mouth covered. He didn't say a single thing. He stood in the same spot where literally every day impeach Trump protesters stand and protest even loudly, and he simply just stood there. He stood there with his face covered, didn't say a thing, and he got arrested. And then he got an order where he couldn't go into Capitol anymore. So that's what actually led to the recent charges, is that he stood on the staircase and he's been told that he can't go into Capitol, but he simply stood on the staircase, and now he's getting arrested for it. So I'm going to get into that video from a year ago of him getting arrested right now.
I want everybody to see the censorship in this country. Impeach Trump protesters come here every day and have never been arrested. But I'm arrested today because I have this sign. That's the attack on free speech in this country. That's the two-tier justice system that we're dealing with. If you're impeached Trump liberal Democrat protester, you get to come here every day with no consequence. But I have security all over me because I'm standing here silently. And if that doesn't show you the attack on free speech, if that doesn't show you the two-tiered system, I don't know what will.
And it's like they don't speak about this. They hate this guy, and it's not because he's ideologically different or anything. They really hate him because he's effective. Like Owen Shroyer, he's been kicked out of CPAC repeatedly for multiple years simply for just being an effective guy. It's not like he's ideologically like non-conservative, so it's like, oh, get out of here. No, I mean, they'll let ideologically non-conservative people like Bruce Jenner get up there, but Owen Shroyer can't be there because he's effective, and they want to maintain this image of ineffectiveness. I want to know your takeaways on what I said in that video.
Yeah, I mean, there you go. It's just like, exactly. I think they're very scared of people who are effective. They're very scared of people who like remotely try to use either ideas or methods out of the mainstream paradigm. I mean, you look at Owen Shroyer, I don't even think necessarily, I mean, knowing from a lot of his content, he's not even really someone who ideologically, I mean, he gets it. I mean, he's solid, but really was even kind of that radical ideologically, I think, in terms of like his actual beliefs. I mean, I think for most of his content I see, he's just kind of like generic, kind of like pro-Trump, pretty solid conservative. But you look at, I guess you could look at the methods he used, and a lot of the things he actually would do were fairly effective, and he would actually kind of put himself out there, kind of put himself in danger for the cause, for the movement. And the fact that he was doing that, and the fact that you're right, he was being very effective. I think I know a lot of people who, I guess Owen Shroyer was sort of their introduction to conservatism, and so someone like this. Yeah. And I think that a lot of the people kind of in power, because Owen Shroyer, he works for InfoWars. He's kind of a little bit more grassroots, a little bit more dissonant. I think a lot of the conservative institutions in power that he actually kind of threatens, and at the very least on like a business model level, maybe even more than that, they just don't care to stick up for the guy. And, I think a lot of people probably were kind of rooting for the guy for this to happen, which I think is a disgrace.
And I've been watching. I watched a lot of War Room. I mean, he was the guy that got me into politics, really. But I've been watching a lot of War Room for like a long time, and he's one of those guys, kind of like Tucker. That's he'll speak up about Trump. He'll speak up about when he's caving into this establishment. So he's definitely not someone that's like quiet on it. He's not some quiet guy. Someone that's gonna sit behind. I'm gonna be ineffective, and I'm gonna take the generic stances. I'm gonna be like, freedom. And then that's like it. Yeah. And they hate him for it. They simply do. I have yet to see a political account outside of like the Populist Center that has really just spoken about anything about Trump, about Shroyer getting charged and soon to be arrested.
Or about any of these people being persecuted by the American regime. Overall, it's like, it's just, you're hearing radio silence from the supposed people who like the conservative establishment is supposed to represent, right? They're supposed to kind of be there for us. They're kind of supposed to be the agent. They sort of be they're supposed to work essentially for us, and, they don't do it. So.
And it really just goes back to like, they're not ideologically like really ideologically like libertarian in the sense that like, they're actually libertarian. They're like, you guys like big government, so I don't like you. I guess some of the minarchists, the gay minarchists, some of them are like that, like the one that was on Slightly Offensive in that one debate that looks like the Easter Island face. But none of them are like, they don't actually like hate government in any sense. I mean, if they did, they simply sat down if they hated government. Really, what it comes down to is they will take whatever position is required to simply just retard the political conservative movement, whether that's not talking against the feds whenever they do something like charge Owen Shroyer, or whenever they put they're all like justice just for all. They'll never speak on the no-fly list. They'll never speak. If they do, they'll be like, oh, Ted Kennedy's on the no-fly list. They won't be like, oh, Nick Fuentes and Lauren Witzke are on the political fly list for being conservatives. They're never going to speak on it unless we actually start pushing back. We start speaking up. We start calling these people. We start, infiltrating their events. And it's really true that we also have to utilize conservative infrastructure, as cringe as it is. People like Michael Knowles and Tucker Carlson are really genius in what they're doing, because they know that we need to mold the political infrastructure towards this more populist message, and away from this like cringeitarian losing message. And we really need to like move it. So they're using these medias that already exist. Same with John Doyle, like the Blaze. They're using these medias that already exist to alter the message, because really when they say stuff, the people they don't really understand like what John Doyle or Tucker Carlson, or why who was the other, why Michael Knowles, they don't understand like why that's ideologically different, because they're dumb. But the boomers, whenever they hear them talk, they're going to pick up on some of that stuff. It's going to change what they're thinking. I mean, whether they like theoretically understand it, which they aren't, they just see a figurehead and they follow it. Like, they're not going to be like, oh, this guy disagrees with Ben Shapiro. I like Ben Shapiro, so I'm going to stick with him. They don't really notice the difference between them. They don't notice the difference between Michael Knowles and Ben Shapiro. They simply listen to like the talking points and then adapt their views from it. And it's really genius what they're doing in infiltrating that and shaping the conservative movement.
And I'm big on this. It's like, I mean, obviously, I think we need people who are really just willing to basically like say everything that needs to be said and like really put themselves out there and really face the consequences of it. We need people like that in the movement, obviously. And so I would never discredit the people that do that. But I think at the same time, in the same way that, we can't all just withdraw from the big tech platforms because we need to be able to reach people. I think the same is true when you talk about conservative infrastructure and the conservative the things we've built, stuff like that. And I think it's a great point that it's like, if we are able, even if like you look at something like, the institution of something like Fox or whatever, that's like, oh, it's corporate, it's the establishment, but we are able to get, but it's also true that they have a lot of reach and they have a lot of influence. So if you're able to get people like Tucker and stuff like that, who really like are on our side and get it, or willing to kind of use these big platforms to spread like messaging to a much wider audience of people, I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's what we need to do. We need to be, and not just in the media side. I think the entire movement, congressional offices, nonprofits, all the stuff, think tanks. Like, I think in general, we need to just be kind of putting our people in these institutions, even outside of the conservative infrastructure itself, just societal infrastructure. We need to be putting our people basically in all of the institutions. And this is basically how the left took power. It all started with the Long March, right? That was kind of how it all came to power. That's kind of all it happened. They just infiltrated like all these institutions as much as they could. Well, we basically need to be doing the same thing, right? And obviously we need kind of our thought leaders to really be kind of calling the shots on that. But we also need a lot of people to actually be willing to kind of go into this and kind of work within the system and work within the establishment to push what we want,
And I think that's really also true that like we have our everyone has their own roles. We have the guys that need to be like vocal about like the issues with like these organizations like TPOSA. We need the guys like Owen to do that, but we also need the guys that'll actually infiltrate it and alter the message and utilize it. Everyone has their role, and a lot of people aren't utilizing their role or doing it to their full potential because they're addicted to like a bunch of other stuff, addicted to their own dopamine. But what they really need to do is really step up, and we need to continue to be vocal about it, because we're reaching people. I mean, Charlie Kirk, whether it's intentional or not, whether it's like to grift or not, we've at least in some way changed the conversation to where he has to start moving towards us. We have at least some way become vocal enough to where we're having to start we're gonna have to start influencing the conversation, whether that's because we've influenced Charlie directly, or whether that's because he's having to grift to appear to be on our side to like maintain his relevancy. Either way, it really shows our effectiveness.
No, it's so true. And you look at someone like Charlie, it's like, I think his audience is a lot different from ours, and I know it's mainly supposed to be catered at young people. Let's be honest. I think Charlie knows this too. His main audience is a lot of like older people, stuff like that. But they really do like him. They really look up to him. And so if he's out here, basically kind of pushing the needle in the right direction with that type of audience, it's like I think it is a net positive, whether or not people think it's honest or not. I think overall, it's like it's a benefit, even if it's not like the end goal. I think it's moving stuff in the right direction.
So true. I mean, literally the case. If anyone in chat wants to ask any questions, I'll get to that. But we can keep talking until some does start rolling through. So when it comes to like the NAP as relevant to like vaccines and masks, does like your opinion like change? Let's say if it was like an actual threat and the vaccine was an actual fix for it, and like literally not having it was actually killing people, would like your opinion on that change? Or does it happen to be that you don't want like something more dangerous than the virus itself to actually be mandated?
I don't want to get you taken off of YouTube, but what I will say is that I think that a lot of it, is there's part of it that's situational, but I think there's also part of it that's moral too. But it's like I think a lot of my stance on the vaccine stuff, it's not necessarily that like if everything were perfect, would I necessarily be against kind of using the state or whatever it is? Maybe partially, in the sense that I wouldn't be for, I think, like excessive force or whatever. But I think I'm gonna stop. I don't want to get you taken off, so let's just avoid this.
All right.
All right.
Michael has a question. Hey Vince, with all these problems about big tech invading privacy, I've heard about ancestry tests selling data and there being a new alternative. Have you heard about DIYM?
I have not heard about whatever that is, but I have heard about ancestry tests selling data. It's such a trade-off, to be honest. It's like, I think the benefit of me actually showing the world that I am indeed part African and it's not just a joke.
Oh my God.
That would be kind of a W, but at the same time, it's like, do I want to give my DNA to the technocrat Cope World Order? I don't know. It's what I mean. If there's an option that where you can actually trust them, I don't know. I don't know if you can trust anyone, to be honest. But
she said DNIYM stands for D's nuts in your mouth.
So, haha, you're so funny, yeah. Michael. Wow. I'm wheezing right now. I'm literally wheezing right now.
Does Vince support Carter Shaw nationalism?
Yes, 100% of Al.
Yeah, it's definitely a trade-off. Like with ancestry, I mean, we as conservatives, and more populists, we like ancestry. We think it should be protected completely. We care about our people, the people that came before us. We care about our families, and it's something that we honestly want to know. But we also don't like, being sold off by these corporations that want to give our information to these technocrats that will continue to jail us and censor us for different things.
Yeah, it's true.
All right, Slum, hit me up the question. Opinions on monarchy and your preferred system.
You want to go? Am I going? Okay, so I think monarchy does have some benefits. I think, especially something like a constitutional monarchy, a parliamentary monarchy, is like, I think. You look at a society like Britain, I think the big problem in America is like we just don't have a lot in common. We don't really have something that really binds us together, whereas a monarch is kind of able to do that. At the same time, I think like it's not really the most like applicable system in America. Like I guess I'm fine with the system we have here if it was set up the way it was meant to be set up and ran the way it was supposed to be run, which is clearly not nowadays. But I do think that there is something to be said about kind of the benefits of having a monarch, even if it's just a figurehead, to kind of be there as like a uniting force of the country. Obviously, America has no uniting force. And what is this? But we agree on the Constitution. First of all, we don't. Like the majority of the population probably doesn't. But even if we did, it's just a piece of paper. It's a piece of paper that's not even particularly ideological or philosophical. It just literally lays out like the way the government's supposed to run. That's what holds us together. A really boring document, like writing a bunch of rules. Like, that like no. But I think it definitely adds kind of more to society. Whether you look at Britain, Rome, stuff like that. Like it's a strong unifying force. I think there's something inherently kind of conservative and hierarchical about it. But
Yeah.
I don't think it's a practical application today. I think a lot of the monarchists who are kind of in the modern political sense are, frankly, they're LARPers. It's kind of a LARP, But I think, like, in an objective analysis, there are some benefits to it that I think the United States, not that they should adopt, but could kind of learn from and kind of take a look. Well, if the monarchy holds it together there, what holds us together here, right? Questions like that, I think, are good.
That's definitely something I actually put in my notes was about the Constitution. Something I wanted to bring up. Like, I noticed when Trump was playing like "God" and I'm proud to be American. That was his walk-in song, the generic song where it's like, well, at least I know I'm free. And it really comes down to like these fail safes, like Second Amendment or the Constitution, where it's like, oh, these pieces of paper will make it to where we cannot be captured because the people that are currently in the moment, they never actually fear what's coming. And sometimes they do, but if they don't, like Rome didn't, or like we aren't right now, it's going to inevitably lead into collapse. I mean, the Constitution is powerless. And even if we have like Supreme Court that's supposed to be appointed by Republicans or whatnot, I mean, Hamilton acknowledged that SCOTUS justices would be influenced by like their opinions and the opinions of the masses. And when we allow the country to move to the left, it's going to inevitably lead to the justices using their power for more left reasons. Like, even though we've had Republican justices for the entirety of 21st century, we've had rulings that allow for literal animated child porn to be legal. We've allowed for rulings on just obscenity laws becoming illegal. We've had rulings on like you can't pray at school, or rulings that like you can't end DACA. Just very cringe things. It's like, and it really gets back to fusionism. Being in power really means nothing if you're not going to utilize it for conservative reasons.
Yeah, that's the problem. Is you look at these conservative Supreme Court justices. Many of their doctrines sort of are very kind of anti-power and and government essentially doing anything, even if it's for our own ends. And so, you look, I think a lot of times the Supreme Court is probably, or this conservative quote unquote courts oftentimes can be more of a hindrance to us than they can be, effective, right? Obviously it's better than having like liberal justices who will just outright strike down everything that we try to do. But when it comes to things that the left wants to do or is going to set up, and then like, and the conservative courts supposedly are going to shut it down, you really can't trust that, because what these courts will often say is take the supposedly conservative, more like fusionist position that it's like, oh, it's not the court's jurisdiction to decide this, whatever it is. So, I mean, that's what you see. That's what you saw with friggin' Amy Coney Barrett and Indiana University, the vaccine mandate there. That's what you're going to see. That's what you're going to see with like courts that call themselves conservative, I think, a lot of times.
All right. My man DG Koopa said, what are your opinions on environmentalism on the right? As in like, more conservatism.
I am anti-environmentalism because I think environmentalism is like essential. What environmental truly means is basically the idea that humans should like leave the environment alone, and I'm opposed to that. I think that God basically left us a lot of these resources to use, but to use responsibly. And so that's why I don't consider myself to be an environmentalist, but I do consider myself to be a conservationist, right? And I think conservationism is basically the doctrine that, these things are here for us to use. Nature, nature's resources, all these things are here for to use for humans to enjoy and to benefit from and to make their lives better. But because they are here, and because these things are good, and because we ought to preserve our natural beauty and our resources, we ought to use these things sustainably, so that they are there for future generations, and so that we can continue to keep on using them. And so that is my view on the issue of the environment. Not that it's like, oh, but nature is we ought to protect. Mother Nature is going to come and get revenge on you if you keep using it or whatever. It's like, no, like we ought to use nature. We should use our resources, but I think we should just use them responsibly, but for the benefit of humans. And that's why I think the environmentalist doctrine tries to basically say that the environment's more important than humans. And in that sense, like, no, I'm a humanist. I think you put humanity first, but in order to put humanity first truly, you have to be a conservationist. You have to be use your resources responsibly, and I think that's an inherently conservative position. I mean, conservatives, I think, at least should be, when you really consider what it means to be a conservative, we should be all in favor of responsibility when it comes to the environment and sustainability. But what we're not for is stupid, cringe, like almost hedonistic doctrines about like worshiping Mother Nature or worshiping the environment. These things are just stupid and they're idiotic.
I mean, it's so true. I mean, there's honestly more people now that believe in like Mother Nature or believe in like Zeus or something than like God. Honestly, like earlier, I saw this comment on this YouTube video where like it was just a lightning strike that hit someone, and someone was like Mother Nature. No, someone said Zeus was mad, and that was like all the comments. And I saw like maybe like one comment about God, and it's like it's pretty much where we're at. It's like when we go back to the Constitution, I mean, it was made for a moral and religious country. As far as that would like intertwine, and as far as that would mean, and it would imply, it can only be sustained and it will be only followed as long as the country is religious and moral itself. So once it becomes irreligious and immoral like it is now, I mean, it really doesn't apply, and that's the truth of it. And we shouldn't be like following like the interpretations of the Constitution currently, because simply it's just a document and it's really ineffective in a society right now. And I mean, that's really where we're at.
Yeah, and I think I think it's not even so much about the Constitution itself, which is just kind of a doctrine that just sets out the kind of a basic structure of government. It's more so, I think, when you really look at the kind of the context of that statement, is more so just about the kind of entire doctrine sort of that the founding fathers left for us, which you could argue is often even misinterpreted. Like, I think, you read the rest of the quote that John Adams said. He says, "It is wholly inadequate. The Constitution is wholly inadequate for the population of any other. The population that is not moral and religious." Is like, I don't think we necessarily need to be worshiping these doctrines about classical liberalism or small government or whatever when we're talking about a society that is not compatible with those things. You look at the time of the Enlightenment, that sort of a Anglo-Saxon, religious society, like is that really what we have today? The answer is obviously no. So the question then becomes, what relevance do those ideas really have today? I think they definitely have some, in the sense that we want to kind of return to kind of the ideal society that our founders tried to create for us. But at the same time, I think it's important to note that in their current application, for this type of doctrine to currently govern our society, our civilization, and our nation, there are definitely limitations to this stuff, and I don't think it's something to be worshipped or followed totally.
Mm-hmm. And conservatives, they really praise something like the Constitution more than they'll ever like praise God openly.
Yeah.
I mean, if you ask them about like immigration, not that we should have immigration at this time, but like if you were to ask them like, should we have requirements that they like know the Constitution or that they like the Constitution? Of course, all of them will say yes. But if we ask them, should we require them to be Christianity? They'll be like, religious freedom, religious freedom.
Yeah.
I mean, they praise the Constitution. I mean, and it's a good doctrine. It's been really good, but it's only been really good as far as God's been good in the country, because all people and all doctrines are abject to failure whenever there isn't God involved.
No, it's true. And I think it's very important to point out that obviously we've been over this before, but like America is a nation that was built out of Christianity, built off of Christian foundations. And it is a Christian nation, or was historically a Christian nation. So what happens essentially when America abandons a religion that, like, even like politically speaking, if we're not even going to talk about like the religion itself, but just politically speaking, its significance has always formed kind of the backbone, formed the foundation of American morality and American society and American culture, all these things. Well, what do you expect to happen to that civilization? What do you expect when you abandon the foundation of a civilization, what do you expect to happen to, the rest of the building, right? It's all going to come down. It's going to collapse. And I think that's what you're seeing now. You cannot abandon the faith that built a civilization, and that's more than a faith. It also forms kind of like a moral code, right? This type of stuff. When you abandon that, what do you expect to happen to the civilization? The civilization is going to decline. The civilization is going to collapse. The civilization that you once knew is going to be replaced with something else, which is going to be either a worse civilization or a lack of civilization, which however you want to put it, right?
I'm trying to remember who said the quote, but it was that one quote. I think it was Rawls that said, "All politics is theoretical." I think that was Rawls. I'm not quite sure.
Theological?
Yeah. I said theoretical. Yeah, theological. Not bad. Yeah, and it's simply the case. I mean, if you don't have God in your life, if you aren't influenced by God, you're going to be worshiping yourself, because everyone worships something, whether that's like the government, God, themselves. And liberalism can be simply defined as the worship of the self over God, over like anything. We're going to get rid of these classes. We're going to get rid of these hierarchies because we worship, sorry about that. We worship ourselves. And we think the self, we think people, they can be independent. They can run without parents. They can be without a government over them because the self is great. The self is awesome. And, we're always like collectivism, but these liberals inherently, they only like collectivism when it's like effective towards them. Like ideologically, they actually like more an individualist culture where people are just literally just like do whatever, and then they do whatever, and then they just die. And that's kind of what the nation has been doing as a whole.
Yeah, I think the real difference when you really break it down between conservatism and liberalism, like most fundamentally, most ideologically, is kind of the viewpoint on this type of stuff. I think conservatism, most fundamentally understood, is kind of just the acknowledgement of human nature and of natural hierarchy, right? And a lot of that comes from our belief in God, but even you could kind of even make a secular justification for this, but just simply that there is a natural order, there's a natural hierarchy to things, human nature exists. And so because of that, there is a certain way in which we are supposed to live. There's certain, and if you're Christian, obviously you kind of see it as kind of God's rules. And that's why when we live against God's rules, when we live in kind of violation in the way he's sort of laid out for us to live, we're not really happy, right? We kind of slide off the cliff, like as a person, right? But regardless of where you think the authority comes from, you could even argue it comes from nature, evolution, whatever it is, there is this natural order to things, and humans are kind of designed to live within that and live within certain hierarchies that will just naturally sort of form and manifest themselves, and sort of these unwritten rules that are there. Meanwhile, you look at liberalism. Liberalism is sort of more of this individualist doctrine that once you liberate the individual from natural order, from natural hierarchy, things like this, from tradition, from the rules essentially of human nature, they will become free. They will become liberated in a sense. And I think you have seen, with the applications of liberalism, that it's just simply not the case. That you try to liberate women from the kind of their natural role in society, but they'll become happy, right? They become great. Women in the workforce, never having kids, single till they're 50 years old. They'll be happy. But you can see with your eyes, you can clearly see as you observe the real world with common sense and common intuition that this is not the case, right? It's not working because, I think it's true. God wins in the end. And so basically the rules that he kind of left behind, it's kind of like, nope, that's not how it works, right? You violate natural order. You try to liberate human beings, individuals from the natural order of things. It just doesn't work that well, Yo,
it's Brutus, the guy that stabbed Caesar. Yo, it's Frankie.
We hate to see it. The other state.
Some Golian said, Vince, what are some personal recommendations for people who want to get involved in the movement?
Hold on. Sorry. I would say, I think you have to find your role. Find kind of what you're good at. Now, if you're good at talking like me and Carter, then I think definitely get on social media, get online. But if that's not really you, then I would say, we, like I mentioned earlier, we need those infiltrators, right? We need people to get into the institutions and really, push, kind of begin the long march, make a difference. So if you're not someone who you think is particularly good at spreading ideas or being the person who writes the ideas or whatever it is, then I would say, do this, get involved with congressional offices, nonprofits and stuff. And maybe you'll find ones that are really good and get it. But I would also say, there's probably don't be scared to even intern for a neocon congressional whatever, and try to get in there and really try to influence, right? Because that's going to be a big important part at this stage as Zoomers within the conservative movement. We don't have the institutional power, we don't have the money or the resources to write the establishment for ourselves. But as we get in, we infiltrate, we kind of work our way up, right? First we go from interns to employees, and the next thing we're the boss, right? 10, 15, 20 years from now. That's kind of the point we need to be at. So I would encourage you, look into that. Maybe intern for a Republican congressman or a nonprofit, whatever it is. We need people. We need to spread our people like jacks across these institutions and, create a difference, right? Slowly.
I mean, not everyone can be a figurehead, but literally everyone can call a senator or really just speak to people that they know as.
But see, that's the problem is I think, and maybe I'm a hypocrite for this because I basically have a position where I'm kind of in the front of things, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that's what's kind of has to be is hard about this sort of like long march. I like the idea of a conservative long march is like there's nothing glorious about interning for a congressional office or just having some kind of behind the scenes job that where you alone really aren't making that much of a difference, but it's kind of more just like if we all do it, we're going to make a difference, like something like that.
If everyone donates $5,
yeah, exactly. But it's just not very exciting. It just doesn't feel like you're like really like in there, even though what you're doing is very important. And so I think that sort of level of maturity where you kind of really realize, maybe I won't get all the glory, I won't get all the fame, I might not even like live to see like the credit of this. It's like that this is what needs to be done, right? This is like what we all need to collectively be doing. I think that's the hard part. I think being famous or whatever, that's the easy part, but the hard part is kind of doing these kind of roles that you don't get the glory, you don't get the fame, but you make a really important difference, I think, in the end.
All right. DG Kupo asks, does Vince prefer Asian Boy Autumn, Christian Girl Fall, or Autistic Autumn?
I like we said on the stream last night, I think the Christian girls should get the winter. Okay. I think it's a good season for the Christian girls, right? The winter outfits and stuff like that. Like it just works. With that being said, the difference between Asian Boy Autumn and Autistic Boy Autumn, I would argue there is no difference because Asian Boy is basically universally we are all autistic. Like that's who we are. Okay, so I would argue there is no functional difference between Asian Boy Autumn and Autistic Boy Autumn. I think that we are one and the same. So.
How does one deal with liberal parents? I guess I'm going to go on this one first since my mother's, I don't know how to describe my mother. I mean, both my parents, when it comes to like COVID or something, they're pretty liberal. I mean, they watch NBC. I mean, but they're kind of Reaganites. I mean, my dad's more of a Trumpster, but more like a 2020 Trumpster, not like a 2016 Trumpster. But like either one of them, they're pretty independent. And I mean, when dealing with them, I mean, most people's parents, regardless of their opinions, they're going to love you. And if they don't love you, regardless of their opinions, they simply never loved you in the first place because love transcends opinions. And I mean, if you're going to speak out when you can, I mean, speak out whenever you can, because they should love you and they probably will, even if you speak out. And I mean, it's really hard to like deal with it. Like it's so much harder to talk with like my mother about politics and talk about like to talk with you, or maybe even like if I take like a liberal at school, I know it's way easier doing that than like with my parents because you have that connection that like you don't want to hurt them, you don't want to hurt their feelings because you care for them like far more. But we got to acknowledge that like we really can't be complacent right now. It's really not an option. So I guess that'd be kind of how you have to deal with it. Just speak up. They should love you regardless. And I mean, always be adamant about like your love and how everything you believe is fulfilled by your love for Christ and your love for others.
I basically agree with all of that. I think at the end of the day, you should still love them, still remember that they're family, and don't burn that bridge. But
did Vince take care of the cockroach? I'm pretty sure he took care of it with facts and logic, if I remember.
That's so true. That's so true. I just started playing my own videos and the roach just died.
And feelings. People forget. Feelings itself.
Yeah.
Destroying people with feelings is epic. All right. I mean, people aren't ready for that. Okay, I'm not reading that. He asked for a mod and then he says a local 11. Come on, man. What do you think of Nick Fuentes' comments on the APU?
Oh well, we worked it out. Okay, it's just it's whatever. It is what it is. That's all I'm gonna really say on that. I mean, there's no beef. I disagree with some of it, but
I think this is a good question for you because I know you're pretty adamant in support for DeSantis. This guy says DeSantis would be Bush 3, but a bit more socially conservative. What are your takeaways on that?
I don't think DeSantis would be like a civilization saving person by any means, but I mean I think he'd probably be better than the Bushes. I don't think that's necessarily a fair statement. I mean I think he'd be like okay. I think he'd basically be like a solid kind of just effective sort of conservative president, assuming he like stays his course sort of, which obviously you don't know, but like I don't necessarily shill so hard for like DeSantis or anything like that. I just think that I just think that he's just like a decent option. You know what I mean?
That's definitely true. I mean, I do wonder a bit. I do worry a bit about like when like Fox or something like these more establishment things. They'll be like, DeSantis is attacking big tech. He made this bill to attack big tech, and then there was someone that actually gave a. It really didn't do much. I don't remember what exactly it was, but it wasn't much. But there was someone that created a bill that would make it to where just anything would be allowed, except for obscenity. Anything would be allowed. There was no like banning people, and he really just didn't. He just rejected the bill.
Mhm.
And I mean, I think he's great. He's great what he's doing. He's by far our best good governor for sure.
Mhm.
But I mean, I think it's also he's not necessarily the guy. I don't think yet.
Yeah, I don't think he's like a 2016 Trump style figure. You know, I don't see him like that. I don't view him like that. I just view him as like, you know, one of our more solid politicians, basically, is what it is. I still view him basically as a politician, you know, but he's just someone who I think generally is like kind of more on our side and kind of gets it a little bit more, you know. I don't think that's a like an unreasonable statement about him. That's just kind of how I see him, you know.
I also think it's true that he probably honestly is able to do more as governor than he'd be able to do as president. Because really, I mean, as president, sure, like traditionally, like Joe Biden's going to be able to do more than DeSantis can as president, but DeSantis as president is not going to be able to do as much because the swamp is just so much bigger there than it is at like the state level.
No, I think that's true. And I think just think about it for a second. It's like, imagine if, you know, it is kind of it's kind of balkanizing when you think about it, but still imagine if like we had someone like DeSantis or even someone better than DeSantis in the vast majority of Republican states. Like, imagine how different this country would essentially look. Like, even if we have a federal government that is not on our side and sucks, it is terrible. I think people underestimate like how important local and state politics basically are. It's like, you know, you go live in somewhere like Florida, which you can see I do now. It's just like totally different than living in like most of the places that are really run by the GAE, like directly and straight up, you know. And so I think if we really had Republican governors on the level of DeSantis, and they don't exist, you know, DeSantis is by far the best Republican in the country and governor in the country. And I don't even say that because DeSantis is necessarily so good. I mean, he's very solid, but I also say that because you look at all these governors around the country, they're absolutely terrible. Look at people like Ass Hutchinson in freaking Arkansas. And like, these are the people, Kristi Noem in South Dakota. Like, these are our warriors. These are like our big people. It's just like, no. But if you really had DeSantis all across the country, just imagine how different, like you would kind of, how different a viewpoint you would have.
Okay.
All right. Sorry. Can you hear me?
That's fine. Yep. You're back.
Hold on.
Be prepared for the 822 comments. Oh my gosh. He had to do it. I knew you were going to say that, Brutus. But while we're waiting on him, I think it's really true. It's so true that like a lot of conservatives, like a lot of people, they'll like excuse people like Nikki Haley. They'll be like, oh, well, she has to be more like moderate to like win in that state. Well, if you look at like Tate Reeves in like Mississippi or just any of the Mississippi senators. Oh, I need to add them. I forgot. I had to click that button. I mean, if you look at any like the Mississippi senators or the Mississippi governor or the Alabama governor, those aren't like heavily contested states where really have to be like moderate on issues. Really just comes down to the people. I mean, they're literally just grifters.
Sorry, roommate kicked my Ethernet cord out, so that was what happened there. Yeah, no, it's true, and I, you know, just think of how different your perception of the country would be, right? Because we have this perception, it's like, oh, Florida's such a great state, you know. Imagine if all the red states kind of had that perception, right? Wouldn't you kind of feel like your country was like a better place to live, even if Joe Biden was the president? You know, it wouldn't feel like the whole place just sucks, basically, you know. It's true. I think if we actually had people like DeSantis across the country, you'd see a very different country overall, because it adds up, you know. DeSantis influences places outside of Florida too, obviously. So
And it's so true that like you were making the point that really it doesn't take like the big conglomeration, the big, fusionism. It doesn't take this like really having a majority. Really, it just takes having a small group of just really based people. Like if we really attack some of these like senators, these very cringe neocons, and we get them out, like in the short run, we're gonna lose people, but in the long run, we're gonna move the country way more right just by narrative control, just by means of media control, and actually utilizing sort of infrastructure for actual sort of ideas. Because currently, I mean, the people growing up from my generation, I'm also Gen Z, but I'm like the later half, so like 04, so it's like midway Gen Z, but a lot of these people are growing up and they really don't have like a conservative influence except for like Ben Shapiro or these other people. And that's like, again, once we go back, it's like when a lot of people talk about like Michael Knowles, they'll be like, well, he works for Daily Wire and he works for Ben Shapiro, and it's like, I get that, but like it's what a lot of people like need to do right now. Not everyone can like work at InfoWars right now, and the people that do, they're great. Owen Shroyer is great, Alex Jones is great, we love them, but like we also need those people like Michael Knowles or Tucker Carlson. We also need those people like that'll utilize the current mediums to outsource political victories.
Yeah, I agree.
It's like, and you made this point that like the liberals, that's how they started, small groups. I mean, originally it was like these granola cruncher, tree hugging libs, these that take psychedelics, and they were made fun of, really, and they were a small group, but we made fun of them so much we just like ignored them basically, and we let them take a mile. After we let them take a foot, and then we let them take a mile, then we let them take
everything.
Yeah. See, chat went off about 8:22.
Shut up, you guys! I can't do anything. Okay, it's not even my fault. Freaking roommate kicked out my Ethernet cord. Like, what was I supposed to do? What was I supposed to do? Cut off his feet? I mean,
maybe.
Yeah, maybe that's what we're gonna have to do after this. Kidding.
We're gonna wrap up in 4 minutes here. If anyone has any other questions for Vince Dao, it's been great talking with him so far. Very glad that we got this. It's been a long time coming, but he finally got moved into Florida, a much better state than California.
It's so true, dude. Let's all just move here. Okay, we'll start at the Empire here, and then we'll get some more of the South, and then that's probably a good starting point. You start in more friendly territory, and then we will expand. The East Coast is next.
Is Vince Dao a proponent of Daoism?
No, Daoism is cringe hippie nonsense. But I am a proponent of Vince Dao nationalism. Okay, that is the name of our doctrine. That is our ideology. Okay, but Daoism is cringe. We
I think his mic battery died. Maybe. Oh, I clicked the button. Oh, that's me. That was me. I muted him. Wait, did I?
No, I don't think. Can you hear me on the natural sound fine?
Yeah, okay. I can hear you now.
Oh, well. Mic dead. Let's go. Dead mic nationalism. Okay.
But yeah, we're about to wrap up anyway, so that's fine. But yeah, I mean, that's how it goes. I mean, we started out small. You were a small organization, and you still are relative to maybe like TPUSA or something like that, APU. They're still relatively small to maybe like that, but the energy of simply that one event matches. It doesn't even match like TPUSA's all their events combined, and it's not because like there's so many events that TPUSA has more. No, TPUSA has less energy combined than one APS event, because we're trying to be effective. We're trying to motivate people. They're trying to demotivate people, and that's really what it comes down to.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can kind of tell where the energy is, and it's like same thing with Trump. Essentially, it's like, we talked about this, about how when you're really challenging the paradigm, it's fun. It's fun. It's energetic to kind of be rebellious, and kind of really like stand up Whereas if you're kind of just, doing whatever, just not as exciting, kind of being more establishment, kind of just like celebrating the establishment is just not as exciting. And so you can see, you saw the room at because you could hear and you could feel the energy at APS. It was like off the charts, And I think that tells you a lot about like where the energy is and where the future is. And that's what's very important to understand is, like we talked about earlier, political movements are not led by masses. They're not actually led by large numbers. They're just led by like small, hyper-focused, intelligent, strategic groups of people. And so you can look at something like, you could say, oh, but these other events, look how many more people they got. But you look at us and how much more energy we have and how much more like just spirit we have. Who's going to win in the end? The one that can draw 5,000-10,000 people, but they're all kind of dead and not into it, or the one that can draw a few hundred, but they're very, very into it. The reality is the 5,000 people who are just kind of they're just kind of like lukewarm, are actually less politically effective than the 200 or 300 that are like very strong and very intelligent and very into it and really get it. Because in the end, like I said, political movements are not led by masses. They are actually led by small groups of people, and that includes populist political movements. It's kind of a misconception that it's like, well, populism means like the people, the masses. It actually does. In a way, in the sense that like of serving the people, serving the masses, that's true. But the reality is, even populist movements, they're not led by masses. Masses simply follow. They don't lead, right? You need those people to lead, and that to the extent to which we have very strong people who are really going to be the pioneers of this, we don't necessarily need the numbers that they do, because our small handful of people is able to be more effective because we get it more and we're more into it,
It's so true. I mean, if like, let's say you delivered a great speech at the TPSA event that you did. And it's like infiltration. Really, when it comes down to it, I mean, they probably didn't like the message you delivered, but it was great.
It's not true. I'm super effective. The whole room loved it, and the whole crowd.
No, I meant the people loved you.
Like, I meant, and that's what was such a white pill was afterwards. It's like,
yeah,
they had these other speakers, and no hate to them, but like everyone was coming up to me after the speech and talking to me. It's like they really like care for these other people, and I was just like, that's very interesting, And I can speak to boomers too, You got to word things a little differently, but it's definitely doable,
Yeah, I mean, TPUSA, the fans loved it. I was saying more so the organization probably didn't, but that's whatever. But they also know that you're effective, and they're gonna be open to having you back probably because of just how effective you were. I mean, the energy is unmatched. And it really goes back to that point of like the small figureheads compared to the masses. The masses simply follow. And simply, they just, like when we infiltrate, they'll hear a message and they'll delineate that like this message, it's like has more energy than this, so I'll stay more in tune to this than that one. Yeah. And they'll be like, "Yep, great speech, Dao," but that really comes down to it. They're not going to be like, "Ew, he disagrees with these people, so I'm just not going to accept them." They're going to accept them because really, what people care about is just like really just a letter R or D next to your name. That's what the masses really just care about. But when it comes down to like media control, message control, energy is completely effective. And that's why it's like I've gone through phases where I've been like very black pilled kind of currently, but like with like the tides and how they're changing and all these young conservatives like me, John, Rep, Frankie, Nathaniel, all these conservative influencers that are just young and they're hard-spirited, high energy, and they just want to save the West with their boys, and it's really a white pill.
It's true. Love to see it.
All right, I guess I'll wrap it up. Congratulations on moving to Florida. Coffee is the drink of the South. Sorry, MOH.
It's so true. It's so true.
And that'll be it. Thanks for coming out.
All right, thank you guys.